Good day, guys. Welcome back to UK here with episode 1 of what I hope will be a ongoing series here called Games That I Have Played, where I talk about various RPGs that I either play now or I have played in the past. And today I'm going to start with the classic Games Workshop Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. When I was about 8 or 9 and I first learnt of Dungeons and Dragons, I really wanted to play it. It was on my mind a lot, and I think it influenced the fact that I started watching a lot of fantasy movies. Unfortunately, D&D was not the first game that I got into. A friend of mine named Chris came to my school, and at last I found somebody who was a role player. And he wasn't a big D&D fan. However, he liked Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and I was just happy to get involved in any sort of gaming. So we played that. Now, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay from Games Workshop back then, I mean, there have been a few incarnations since, mostly by Fantasy Flight Games, I believe. And they changed it quite a bit. I don't know why FFG have this habit or desire to make something their own when, you know, one reason why people like a game is because of how it plays already. But there you go, different topic. And the way Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay worked was you rolled a set of stats, and although point buy is nice and simple and some would say fair and balanced, I like stat rolling, and so this had things like certain it used the same stats that the Warhammer games use anyway: movement, weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, wounds, initiative, and so on. And you generally roll like a d3 for the minor stats and 2d10 plus 30 for the major stats, modified by your race. There was just 4 to start with: human, elf, dwarf, and halfling. There was an issue of white dwarf that let you play gnomes for some reason, and I think that was added into a compendium book sometime later. Not that I never knew anybody that bothered playing gnomes, but there you go. And you then chose one of 4 paths. You were, I think it was warrior, ranger, rogue, or academic. And then based on your race, you would roll on a table. So I like random character generation. And it would tell you what your starting profession was. And certain races couldn't be certain things. So, for example, if you were a dwarf academic, you could never start as a wizard's apprentice. You could be an acolyte for like a faith, and eventually go cleric, but you could never start the game as a wizard's apprentice. You could eventually become it and then a wizard later on, but dwarves are generally rubbish at being wizards, so there was no point. But there was like 100 professions, and they were all normal things. So you could be a rat catcher, you could be a scholar, a physician, soldier, mercenary, footpad. You were a normal everyday person. There was no like almost superhero characters like D&D presents. You were a normal person, and over time you could increase your stats, your skills. You could change professions, either through ones that were built into your current profession, or if you spent a load of XP, you could jump to something completely different. Huge list of skills, most of which you probably would never use. But it had some cool ones. Things like resistance to drugs, resistance to alcohol was like a skill. And it was quite for the mid to late 80s, it was a really good sort of like very simple game system. Everything was pretty much a D100 roll. The artwork in the game was awesome. You had the typical sort of like black and white style stuff, but all the races, the bestiary, every single profession, even the advanced ones, were like pencil drawings, and they looked absolutely awesome, and it really played to the atmosphere being generated by the game as you read through it. When I rolled my first character up, my friend Chris was going to run what was called the Enemy Within campaign. There's only about 3 books to it in there. I think there were 7 by the time it finished, in unfortunately slowly decreasing quality. And I rolled up a human mercenary because you are taking place in a region of the old world called the Empire, which is a kind of medieval going into Renaissance Germany. You had to be a Germanic name. And so I rolled up Wolfgang Schmidt, because it was the only German name I could think of. And I rolled a mercenary, because I wanted to be a fighter type. So I was a mercenary. And I remember that first game session we had, which was just me and Chris as a one-on-one. And it did something for me which I have never experienced since. In fact, sitting there in his dining room, across the table from him, the world literally faded away, and the imagination took over, and I could see what my character was seeing in the tavern, in the back of the cart travelling through the Reichwald forest, the beast men attacking and me shooting the bow and arrow at them as they were chasing the... Yeah, it all just faded away, and that took over. And I've never, unfortunately, in all my 34 years of role playing, I've never managed to get that back since, which is a real shame. I think we only got 2 sessions in, because we started another player who I think it was somebody that Chris knew anyway, and he rolled up a nobleman and decided to name him Adolf Hitler because it was German. And I think we got like a session out of the 2 of us playing, and then it sort of faded away for some reason. We did play Warhammer a few times over the next 4 years, but it slowly moved away as I got into D&D, and that was becoming my game of choice. About 10 years ago, I think, I did dig out my copy of the rules, and I did get the guys to play the game a couple of times, but it's times have moved on, and it didn't have the same feel, it didn't have the same sort of enjoyment, which is a bit of a shame, because it'll always have a nostalgic element for me. It'll always be part of who I am and my gaming history. But as I say, times move on and game systems change, and you get used to certain other things. And Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay was definitely a product of its age. It was definitely a game for the mid to late 80s, before everything else sort of took over. I no longer have a copy. I think I traded it in probably about 8 or 9 years ago in exchange for something else, I think. But that's my first video on that. Very popular game for me back then, a very fun game. I might do Call of Cthulhu for the next one, so I will put that up in probably a couple of days. Anyway, thanks for watching. I'd love to see your viewpoints, whether you played this, whether you liked it, hated it, what have you, in the comments down below. Down here. Anyway, take care, guys, and good gaming.